name is John, and I am a nobody. This is a strange story about how your life sometimes seems to go round in circles. So, when I was a spotty teenager, I bought a single record which really impressed me. If you're a bit younger, this is a single record. Had normally two songs on it, one on the front and one on the back. And this is an LP. This is actually a double LP, but more on that later. So I bought this single, and it was by The Faces, and a wonderful record, and it was called Stay With Me. And my father said to me, and I quote, "If you ever play that record again in this house," the meaning was there, the threat was there. He was an interesting man, my father, but could be a little bit authoritarian sometimes. Anyway, so I love that record to bits, even though I only played it once. I'm not stupid. And and The Faces were a great band. If you don't know The Faces, or the members of The Faces, or the Small Faces, you might know the name Rod Stewart. And Rod Stewart was the singer at the time, but the Small Faces had precluded him. They were Kenny Jones on drums, Ian McLagan on keyboards, Ronnie Lane on bass, and Steve Marriott on guitar and vocals. They made some great songs. They had some great songs, and they were very successful in the 60s. So this is before my time, but still they were rocking. Anyway, the Faces were basically the same as the Small Faces, but without Steve Marriott. So they got Ronnie Wood in to play guitar and Rod Stewart to sing. And then they became the Faces. And they made this record, which was very popular, called Stay With Me. Now, years later, I was in the studio recording with Nicky Sudden, and we were laying down a track going over a song, and the keyboard player turned to me and said, "John, would you like me to play that with you? That little thing you do at the end?" It was Ian McLagan. And this is the same man who played on Stay With Me, the same record that my father didn't like and I loved. It was a great playing with Ian McLagan. He was such a nice man. And we went to the pub. He was living at the time in Texas, and we went to the pub and had a pint of Guinness, and he looked over to the bar where there was a black guy talking to a white guy, and he said, "Look, this would never happen in the States. You know, they're so casual, so easy." And later on that day, I told him the story about Ronnie Lane. Now, I only got to meet Ronnie Lane once as a spotty teenager, and Ronnie Lane was, I think, the only person I've ever known to leave a band because they were too successful. So he left the Faces because he was tired of playing in big stadiums and he wanted to play in clubs again. So he started his own band called Slim Chance, and I went down to see them. They were playing at my local university in Norwich, and well, it was just wonderful, you know, the gear. The drums looked like they belonged to Kenny Jones. They were very elaborate. And Ian McLagan, who I didn't know at the time, was also playing in the band. So I basically got 2/5 of the Faces. Well, I managed to muster all my courage and went backstage and knocked on the door. And this, I think, roadie opened the door for me. And I said, I'd like to speak to Mr. Lane, please. I was always very polite back in those days. So Ronnie Lane came to the door. And I said, are you going to be playing Debris tonight? Which was a pretty stupid question, actually, in retrospect, because it was probably his most famous song. And he looked at me. He was quite small. He looked at me and said, well, we'll see, won't we? So I went back to my position, which was at the front of the stage, right in front of Ronnie Lane's microphone. And Ian McLagan, as I said, was on the Hammond organ. And they started playing. It was great. Good sound. Everything was great. And they finished the song. And then Ronnie Lane looked down at me because I was right at the front. And he said, I'll never forget it. Oh, yeah, this one's for you. This song's for you, mate. And started playing Debris. It was just one of those magical moments. I told Ian McLagan this story years later, and he said, yeah, well, that's just typical Ronnie, isn't it? It's a wonderful moment, a wonderful moment. And I'm going to be sharing some more of those moments with you. So I hope you enjoyed this. As always, down below, I've left a link, this time to the faces and to the small faces. So I hope you're keeping good care of yourself. I hope you are keeping good care of yourself. And I'll see you in the next one. Alrighty, until then, Tchaikovsky.